I honestly can't believe we haven't spoken about this yet. Welcome back to Color Code, where we crack the code on color selection and break down a color in as many details as we feel necessary. I mean, I could talk all day about this one, but I'm trying to keep it within that 5-minute window. Today's Benjamin Moore color code is CC90, and it has remained a heavily used color in the Designer Classics collection by Benjamin Moore. So anytime you ever see a color in your paint store where there's a code CC, that's how you know it's a Designer Classics. You want to know the name of this one? Well, you make me feel like a natural linen. See what I did there? Now available on Spotify. YouTube Music. Gotta stay on brand. Anyway, if you click this video, I'm assuming that you're considering natural linen for your own project, or maybe a project you're working on if you're more of a professional painter, or maybe you're just a fan of the warm neutral color palette in general. So my goal here with this video is it's actually to empower you with the knowledge of knowing how and where to use this color and what are some potential paint colors you can pair it with, and maybe even add in a trim color or two. Why not? I'm feeling generous. Just as a disclaimer, however, this is just recommendations on my behalf, okay? The idea here is to provide you with some information which will allow you to make those final design choices, because that's a big part of the fun of interior design. It's the self-expression portion that is honestly heavily underrated. Before we dive into this color, I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same one, because there is another color by Sherwin-Williams, which is another paint company if you haven't heard of them, and it's also called Natural Linen, but their version is, I would say, a tad more peachy in comparison, and perhaps a tad more gray leaning as well. Maybe we'll talk about it in another video, but for today, we're focusing on Benjamin Moore's Natural Linen. So starting with how light or dark it is, the way we figure this out is we look at the color's LRV, which is prominently on display on the Benjamin Moore website under every single color name that you look up. But you can find this with most other paint brands as well. For those of you that don't know what LRV is, it's light reflectance value. And that's a scale from 0 to 100, explaining how much light the paint color reflects. The closer to 0, the darker it'll be. The closer to 100, the lighter it'll be. So Natural Linen's LRV is right around 61. And this sort of puts it right at that cusp of light color and mid-tone color. It's actually a pretty magical little sweet spot with paint colors, which means you can use it under varying lighting conditions and still have it behave accordingly. Honestly, if you're really not sure whether this color is going to be too light or too dark for you, the easy thing to do is to simply test it out. I know it seems a bit tedious and a bit of a to-do sometimes, but it'll save you a lot of time and money. Just to make sure you pick the right color. Grab a mighty board and then take that large paintable surface into the room so you can really see if it's too light or too dark for you. I'll leave a link to mighty boards down below if you want more information on them. Although Natural Linen has some beigey tan-like qualities, it's a fairly passive take on them because it's a bit toned down with gray, and that helps settle it and give it the quote-unquote dusty feel that I actually like in colors. Just to give you an example, if we compare it to another color we talked about, muslin, which is another Designer Classics color actually, it's just a few swatches over in the same sort of color collection. You'll notice that Natural Linen feels a little bit darker, and that's because it is. It has a lower LRV by maybe 7 or 8, but it also has slightly less warmth when compared to muslin, which almost looks like it has a subtle orange undertone in comparison. Natural Linen is pretty soft, to be fair, but when you do compare it to those warmer, neutral counterparts with that bit of gray that's in it, it can sometimes have a tendency to show flashes, and I say this very carefully, of super, super subtle green, but only under a very specific set of circumstances, so don't be put off. If you don't like green, this one won't really feel like that. It's just when you compare it to those warmer colors out there. If Natural Linen becomes your only primary neutral color of this type in your space, you most likely won't get any of that, so not to worry. It's only if you really love mixing and matching a variety of warm tones where you might start to see a little bit of that subtle clashing occurring. Moving on to some potential color pairings. This is where you start to get a little bit creative and mix things up. So I want to include some more safe options within the same neutral color palette, but also a more bold and dynamic color for those of you that are looking for that as well. One of the safest options to pick is a warm off-white. This will not only coincide with the warmth in natural linen, but contrasting levels of depth will add a lot of visual variety to your space. You don't just want a bunch of midtones all kind of blending together. You want some light, you want some dark. It adds a character, I guess, to the whole thing. What this will also allow you to do is pick which rooms you want the deeper natural linen color versus the lighter color. In this case, it's Vapor. Another Benjamin Moore color, of course, but this one is AF35. So it's not a CC color, it's from the Affinity color collection, and it just has a lovely lightness to it, both literally and also conceptually. It's warm without feeling overly creamy or yellow, and it's just subtle enough to sit in solidarity alongside natural linen. That's just nice, eh? Even though this is light enough to be a trim color traditionally, I would reserve Vapor as a corresponding wall color for other rooms. We'll get to the trim color a bit later on, so no worries. The second color I would recommend as a pairing is sort of in between natural linen and Vapor in terms of how dark it is, with an LRV of roughly 75. Even though it's part of the off-white color collection by Benjamin Moore, it's actually more of a light color rather than a true off-white, in my mind. It's called French Canvas OC41. This is a color that has more literal colorant in it compared to Vapor, which means you can start to see its undertones a little more prominently. They're more on display. And although online it may appear quite a bit more green than it really does in person, that green is pretty subtle. I wouldn't even really call it a true greenish color. But I do enjoy the fact that it has that green tendency, because what it can do is it can visually erase any green that can be found in natural linen when paired next to it. All in all, it just ends up being another neutral color that's lighter in its appearance that can safely appear alongside natural linen while also having a slightly different look rather than just going with a simple lighter counterpart. They're still a bit different in their undertones, but not so much that they completely clash. The third color is definitely the most bold of the three, and you can really interpret this as a really fun wall color or just a bit of an accent color in the overall color palette. That's taking into consideration maybe your furniture, little accent pieces, fun flower pots, things like that. With an LRV of 33, that's pretty dark, objectively speaking, but not insanely dark. It's just a deep color, and it's called Pewter 2121-30. Now, this is an interesting one to me because you would think that a color named pewter would simply just be a deep gray. But for all intents and purposes, that's kind of what it is, only in reality, it does feel a bit cooler. So kind of in a similar way that natural linen is beigey, but has the gray to keep it a little closer to center undertone-wise, we have pewter, which we assume would automatically be right in the middle, being a gray, but it has that visual cool undertone that just pushes it to the other side ever so slightly. So if you look at it visually, they're both kind of here, but they're really just there. So there is that separation between the two. The two together create a bit of a complementary combination, warmer mid-tone, cooler deep tone, but they're also not too far in either direction where it's going to be way too drastic. Now, what if you want to paint your baseboards? Let's talk trim colors. What color could you possibly pick? I tend to favor slightly warmer tints on the trim to go alongside natural linen. The first color I would think of in this case is good old Cloud White, CC40. It has an LRV around 87, which means it's definitely bright enough to be used as a white paint color. It's been used a whole lot, really, and a lot of people will think that, well, why would I use it then? I don't want to be like everyone else. It really hasn't been as used as much as it used to because of the likes of Simply White and Chantilly Lace. Those are kind of the two main players when it comes to white paint colors, especially on the slightly warmer side, but I still feel Cloud White is such a solid choice for anyone that's looking for a white paint color that just has a knack for simplicity and subtlety. It pairs with warmer leaning colors like natural linen without feeling like it's a super bright white. You want the attention to be on the walls or the features around the room, not necessarily on the trim that's everywhere. That'll just be too distracting. Cloud white won't do that. It'll be there, it'll seem clean, it's not gonna feel yellowy in a lot of cases, but it's gonna behave. It's gonna just cooperate rather than just pull all the focus. Going with a crisper white, on the other hand, is not a bad idea either, but honestly, I just tend to prefer cloud white in this case. That's just me. For a dark trim color choice, or maybe something for your doors inside, I'm really into dark doors recently, Benjamin Moore's Black Bean Soup. Very, very dark color with an LRV of 4, but it's a really, really great choice as a paired trim or door color inside. It will have a very heavy contrast with natural linen, but I really like it because it ends up being more of an off black rather than black, which ends up translating to the darkest brown you've ever seen. The funny thing about this color is when you look at its color chip right here, good old Black Bean Soup, and you go higher up and see its lighter counterparts, they actually look and feel quite a bit cooler. Like they're almost bluish, especially these middle ones. But then when you get really, really dark and get to Black Bean Soup and even Deep Caviar, kind of brown leaning. Black Bean Soup has that mega deep, ultra dark chocolate feeling to it, which complements natural linen really, really nicely. They just fit together. Natural linen is a fantastic all over the house color that will work great as a base to build off of, or for those rooms that you don't necessarily know which color you want, but you're thinking maybe something a bit warmer. Think about what it's named after. It's beautiful woven fabric. Muslin is a color we briefly chatted about earlier, and you can watch a color code episode all about it right here. Boop. This is a color that I labeled as one of the top colors for people looking to sell their home because it tends to be a no-brainer choice in a lot of cases. Also, liking this video is a no-brainer choice too, am I right? I think so.